Did that do the trick?
See. Yep, thank you.
Cool.
All right, so thanks for having me today. I'm going to actually wear both of my hats today, so I'll introduce myself from both perspectives. My name's Stacy Smedley. I am currently a Director of Sustainability at Skanska USA, supporting national initiatives around green building, particularly focused on carbon emissions because we have our own internal zero carbon targets, including our embodied carbon emissions by 2045 at Skanska. And then my other current hat is Executive Director of Building Transparency, which is the nonprofit that is taken the EC3 tool from incubation at the Carbon Leadership Forum into a nonprofit that's responsible for its funding, its management, its scaling, and its adoption. So Skanska has donated a good portion of my time to becoming executive director for as long as it really takes to get the EC3 tool really sustainable at this nonprofit. So I'm going to talk today about reducing the carbon footprint of every building. If there are questions as I go through the EC3 demo, please just stop me and ask. I'm more than happy while we're in the tool to actually have you ask questions and let me be able to kind of navigate it based on your questions. But I'm really going to start out with how we look at embodied carbon. I think from my Skanska perspective, you know, when we start to visualize what embodied carbon is versus operational carbon, it really is all the stuff that contractors touch and procure and all the stuff that designers specify and design around. So it's an important thing that really is driven by designers and contractors understanding it and then specifying and procuring and designing smartly to reduce it. And of course, this is a slide I'm sure you've all seen before, but this is just when we were looking at this from a Skanska perspective a handful of years ago, you know, understanding through Architecture 2030 slides that it was enough of an impact to get just as much attention as operational carbon and emissions. It just needs to have the same amount of focus and attention, and we just don't have the time that we have taken to get literate in operational carbon. So we have to work really fast, which is one of the things that EC3 is trying to help with. Just a little bit of background in terms of how EC3 came to be. A handful of years ago, Skanska actually funded a research study at the Carbon Leadership Forum around just setting benchmarking targets. Skanska was trying to understand and account for our carbon emissions of buildings during construction by taking material quantities and multiplying it by kilograms of CO2 of emissions of building materials using average emissions factors. And what we realized is that all we were really doing was accounting at the end instead of forecasting at the beginning. So there's a database of carbon footprints of buildings that was put together by the CLF that really, for me personally, as I was starting to talk to clients during interviews and early design conversations from a pre-construction perspective at Skanska, would allow me to take a kilograms of CO2 per square meter or square foot, multiply it by the proposed square footage of a project, look at the EUI and the energy grid, and really start to say, hey, client X, here's how much carbon emissions your project could emit and what that split is between embodied and operational. So I started doing that on projects and really using, again, this box plot, sorry about that, this box plot idea where this carries into EC3 also, but on the benchmarking side, if you're looking at a kilogram of CO2 per square meter of buildings, one was really high, one was very low. The way the CLF set this up was the outliers are the bottom 20% and the top 20%. So this is going from the 80th to the 20th percentile of the data in that rectangle. So I started doing things like this where I would take projects and look at different markets and then understand what that 80th to 20th might look like based on those benchmarks in that study. And these are the kind of diagrams that we started to create. So this is looking at a commercial office building, you know, different sizes, either actual projects in different markets, and what that split looks like with an assumed energy use intensity of 80, with a location-specific energy mix. So these are the actual grid mixes when it comes to coal or hydro or other sources of energy for each of these places. What happens when you drop the EUI to a lower number, which of course then increases the embodied percentage of impact. And then because I'm in Seattle, what I would do is, you know, look at this from a Seattle perspective. And in Seattle, where we've got a pretty clean energy grid with our hydroelectricity, you know, it normalizes all this where really the embodied impacts on a project are around 85% typically. If you're doing a pretty good job on your energy efficiency, which we already have good code here too. So this is what I started to show to clients, and clients started asking me, now that you're showing us what the impacts are early in design, before we even actually designed a building sometimes, how do we reduce it? We now understand that there's a potential impact, but we need to understand how we can make smart design choices and smart procurement choices to really reduce those carbon emissions. So I started looking at the stages of carbon, embodied carbon, and where I thought we needed to make impact quickly. This is just to remind everyone what this looks like. Of course, this is from the World Green Building Council bringing embodied carbon up front report. But just to ground everyone, you know, embodied carbon is in its holistic form all of these things. It's the product stage, which is cradle to gate manufacturing emissions. It's the construction stage, which is installation and transportation of products to a site and the installation of those products. It's the use stage, or the replacement cycle of how many times you're, you know, taking out and replacing things like carpet or roofing. Then it's the end of life stage, which is what you're doing with all those materials when you deconstruct a building. So that's embodied carbon. What we found through our analysis on Skanska projects and just other research is that this upfront carbon, this A stage, is where over 80% of the impacts can live when it comes to the overall embodied carbon stages. So if 80% are in this stage A, and then within stage A, this product stage is actually 95% of the stage A. So construction process is 5% of this whole stage. Then really the place that has the most impact immediately that we can focus on and start to reduce is this product stage. And that's really how we started to think about a tool, was how could we really inform and normalize the data around this cradle to gate emission stage. And that's really what EC3 focuses on. What I also started to do with my own research was look at kind of the ecosystem of tools out there. And if there was a tool that really focused on embodied carbon procurement, that means looking at product versus product emissions and selecting the lowest carbon option. What I found was a whole bunch of really good life cycle assessment tools that existed already, tools like Tally or OneClick and Athena, that were using, again, data that was all of these stages across all greenhouse gas impacts, but also average data to help inform systems level and materials versus materials level choices. So really good directional information, holistic information using average data that allows you to say, okay, is timber or steel better? Or is this envelope system or this envelope system better directionally? And really inform those types of early design choices. What didn't really exist was a way to actually take a project, once you've done that early analysis, hopefully, and optimized your project from a systems and material choice perspective, and really get to that product level assessment where you could take what you've done, look at manufacturers and products, and then specify and procure great language around specifications and procurement that actually would drive to the lower carbon options. So in an ideal world, design teams and contractors are working together, doing early life cycle assessment, moving to specifications and procurement through the lens of product carbon, and then realizing the savings at the end of the job by understanding what they procured and being able to track that very, very realistically and in a kind of full way. So because we had to create this tool that was the supply chain specifications tool, Skanska seed funded the project with support of our first client that we kind of proposed this to, which was Microsoft. Once we got through a proof of concept, we turned the project over to the Carbon Leadership Forum, whose focus is on incubating ideas and open access, open source things around embodied carbon. And what that allowed us to do was actually get partnership from over 50 industry partners, a funding perspective to launch the tool, as well as input from all of these stakeholders in terms of how the tool works, what it does, how it actually reflects information about these materials, and really understand how we can assess material level emissions with uncertainty in EPDs. So I'm going to go into all of that now, but I like framing the story as to how EC3 came to be and what it's really trying to do from a gap filling perspective when it comes to embodied carbon assessment. So I'm going to go ahead and go to buildingtransparency.org and just launch the tool. Buildingtransparency.org is the website where you can access and register for free for the tool. The tool is free and open access, so anyone can register and use the tool without charge. I think as of right now, we have 8,000 registered users, so it's grown exponentially since November, which is really exciting. So I'm going to go ahead and open the tool. Signing in, because of course I've already got a registration and I'm signing into my Building Transparency account. The first thing to note is that there's these different user levels. So when you first sign in, if you don't put in your profession or your company, it's going to set you as a private user. This is because of security laws that we have to follow. We can't let you share information and do things that basically connect you to other users until we know that it's a professional login or registration. So the first thing to do when you log in is go to your profile and make sure that you've set your employer and your profession. And once you've got your employer set, what happens is there becomes an employer organization page for your company. One might already exist if you have other folks already registered, and it will allow you to see who else in your organization is registered and create different permissions based on who's the admin. So there is this level of kind of organizational and personal profile management within the tool, which is important to note to become a professional user, which gets you the access that all public users have. Okay, so that's the housekeeping. When you log in, it's going to take you to this home page. The one thing that I didn't explain is really how EC3 works, which I'll do now. The tool is really based on a database of environmental product declarations, or EPDs. EPDs are third-party verified documents that disclose manufacturer and product level emissions of materials with a kilogram of CO2 or global warming potential number per unit. So I can actually pull that up really quickly. My presentation, just as a graphic, that's a little simplified versus what's in the tool. But really, EPDs are PDF documents with a whole bunch of words that explain how the analysis was done. So all we're really looking for and keen on finding is this kilogram of CO2 equivalent per unit. If we have that, we can do both comparative assessments of product to product, but also material quantities times these numbers to create a project. So again, the tool is really based on this robust database of EPDs. The landing page lets you understand where our EPDs currently are and how many we have. We started as a North American database, but we've grown to a global database since our launch. So you can toggle here between concretes and non-concretes and see that we're starting to get EPDs from other places, which is really exciting. The next one's going to show you just from a US perspective, concretes, where we're starting to see adoption of mixed specific concrete EPDs and how many we have. For concretes, it's really important to understand it since it is a localized material when it comes to supplying it. And then of course, where we need more adoption. So this is at a county level in terms of EPDs in the system. See, we are starting to get some in Texas, but not a whole bunch compared to what we have in California and kind of the West Coast. You can also look at concrete EPDs for things like carpet tiles, gypsum board, other things that are in the tool, where they're coming from in terms of manufacturing facilities. You can look at total number of EPDs in the system. So you can see here we've got over 30,000 mixed specific concrete EPDs, and then how that then applies to other categories of materials. This is a live database, so this updates every day in terms of how many EPDs we have. And then the last one is just plants and manufacturers. So how does those, like for example, 30,000 mixed specific EPDs actually drill down into the number of manufacturers we have in the tool? So that's just how you can actually start to visualize the data and watch the database grow and understand what's in it. There are kind of two key features of the tool that directly apply to kind of design and procurement. The first is the find and compare materials function. If I open this up, what you're going to see is a whole bunch of building materials into categories. And if I just open up a couple, you're going to see that we've got ones that are public, which are the ones that don't have this pilot by them. And then a whole bunch of pilot categories where we actually have the EPDs in the system, and we're working through making sure that we can sort and search them the way we need to, that we're getting buy-in from the industry organizations for those material categories, and that we're applying the methodology for comparability, which I'll talk about in a minute. But this is just to show you there are all these other material categories that are coming that aren't currently in the public version, working hard on getting to release. Within the find and compare materials for the public categories, I'll start with ready mix. Click on the ready mix button. It's going to bring up this design intent function where you can start to drill down into different requirements. For concrete right now, this is kind of a wish list of what we wish we could search for based on performance characteristics. Right now in EPDs, we at least know that we can search by strength typically. So I'll put in a strength of concrete. You can pick a country or a state. I'm just going to pick Washington because I know we've got a good slew of EPDs. Actually, let's do Texas since we have some, even though it's not many. Click Texas, I'll click search. And what it's going to do is, it's not giving me any, even though it said we have some. So let me just go do Washington for the demo. So if you have EPDs in a place, it's going to give you this results information where it's telling you, okay, here's your search criteria. Again, just to remind you what you're searching for. Here are the number of EPDs that we have for this material. category and your search requirements. So there's 363. It's going to give you that box plot, which is similar to the one I showed you for the benchmarking study, giving you per kilograms of CO2 per cubic yard, all the results aggregated. So here's the lowest result we had from one EPD, here's the highest, then there's this range of conservative, which is 80th to 20th percentile. So most of the EPDs are here. There are outliers above and below that might be based on unique mixes, and then there's a CLF baseline. And the baseline is established kind of to be like ASHRAE, where there's a line in the sand where the reduction targets can be set. It's per strength, and it's a national baseline for concrete. If you actually click on this little button, it'll take you to the baseline document where you can actually review how those baselines were set and what they are, and how they're used in EC3. There's a number of things that you can do with the data that's returned. So if you scroll down, of course, you can see that each of these EPDs has been digitized and is a line item where you can read the information we were able to pull out of it. You can click on the details button to dig into more of what we were able to pull out and get some information about it. What you're going to see here is the selected material, the actual disclosed number as the line, and then this blue squishy stuff around the line, which is my technical term for the variability in the data. So what this is telling you is that there's this much uncertainty that that number is absolutely accurate. And just to dig into that for a second, I go to the actual EPD. What you're going to see is that for every EPD, what we've done is estimated the uncertainty by understanding if that EPD is manufacturer specific versus industry average, plant specific versus for all plants, product specific versus for all products of the plant. And then this last one is supply chain specific. So for concrete specifically, the reason there's still a little bit of blue squishy stuff left on this one is because that they're using average cement plant data. If they provided a cement specific EPD, would be able to fill this in to somewhere around 90% supply chain specific, and their blue squishy stuff would drop to 0. And we're happy to report that based on this, we do have one cement supplier doing plant-specific EPDs for their concrete supplier, and we're in the process of inputting that into the tool. So the idea behind this is actually starting to take hold in terms of manufacturers understanding the need to disclose more accurate, non-average data for their emissions factors. If I go back to this page, the other really powerful parts of the tool are the ability to compare. So you click on the Compare Manufacturer button. What it's going to do is for your search in your product category, give you manufacturers next to each other. So here's Stoneway Concrete with 87 EPDs, Cadman with 119, Portland with 157. So for my 5,000 PSI search, directionally, Stoneway it looks like it's optimizing their mixes more in general. So that helps us actually focus on key suppliers that may be doing a better job already. Gives us the number of suppliers that we have to start with from a adoption perspective with EPDs. And then also lets us look at things like, what if in a specification you wanted to set a kilogram of CO2 limit? So could I say that all 5,000 PSI mixes for concrete must be under a certain number, and know that my suppliers can meet that target, or at least 2 of them could, for instance. So this is really to help inform those specifications and bid document language around embodied carbon. It also allows you to do things like if you are using one supplier, you could actually compare their plants and get that same kind of graph. Or if you knew that you had 4 of these mixes from Cadman's Woodinville plant that met your performance requirements, you'd be able to compare those to each other. And this pops up here at the product specific level. This wasn't working yesterday either. So I will go to another material category to show this. Always happens with demos, and we always push out new features on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. So I may need to refresh, but I'll move on to carpet tile to show you this comparison feature, because it's actually nice to show on an easy to spec material. I'm doing a carpet tile search for US manufacturers at this point, and I'm going to get again a number of results. I can do my comparison of manufacturers to understand directionally why this is not working. I don't know. Just refresh my screen. Sorry about that. This always tends to happen when there's demos. I can show you the slide that shows this. Let me go back to carpet tile, just see if I can get it to work this time. Nope, it's not. So anyways, this is normally showing you the compare by manufacturer feature. But if I go and actually click on products, we're going to cross our fingers that it works this time. I'm just picking these at random. But if I click compare, there we go. What you're seeing here is for the products I've picked, you can search and sort and select, and it will remember. If I know that all of these products were things that my client would allow me to use, or that my interior designer liked to use, I'd be able to see comparatively which one's the lowest carbon option and has the least amount of uncertainty in the data, and hopefully use that as my basis of design for a specification. What this is doing is actually incentivizing manufacturers to reduce the carbon emissions of their products. Interface is coming out with a carbon sequestering carpet tile this year with an EPD. It's going to be our first one that's going to be below zero that we're going to have to figure out. But we are getting manufacturers talking to us and really wanting to invest in the EPDs, understand their impacts, and then be competitive in the market. So this is really also informing that average data we use in LCA, where if we start reducing the emissions of products based on low carbon options coming to market, those average numbers can then go down as well. So this is really one of the most powerful parts of the tools when talking about market transformation and manufacturer adoption. So that's the find and compare materials function. I'm going to keep going unless folks ask questions. I know there's questions in the chat. We can maybe address the chat questions at the end. Kind of a set of projects in the tool. I don't know what I'm going to click here. Just kind of, I don't even know if these will really be comparable in terms of scale, but you're able to compare projects and see how they compare next to each other from a carbon perspective, either per material category or from just overall conservative to achievable potentials. And you can actually start to create kind of folders in here where you can have projects of a specific type for benchmarking. So if I had a whole bunch of K-12 projects or commercial office buildings I wanted to put into a folder, you can, create a campus and then actually move these things into folders and start to organize your information. The last thing I think is actually the import EPDs function. So one of the things that's been really helpful recently is the fact that anyone can add EPDs to EC3. So you can actually upload up to 25 PDFs of EPDs to the tool if they're for something that we don't have. If you're in a different location, like Europe, and you want to see your EPDs in the system, once you've done that, you're just going to go to a box folder. But you can actually then, if I go back to this button, it'll show you the EPDs you've imported and if they've actually been parsed and digitized successfully, or if there were some errors in the machine reading of the PDF, and just where they are in the system. So those are really all the kind of core features. There's a manage data tab too, where you can just, without doing the find and compare materials function, just look at all of the EPDs in the database. We have manufacturer partners that are now kind of managing their own data and able to go in and ensure that the product descriptions and plant locations and things are correct. So they'll use this quite often to search and sort for their own EPDs. We are able to look at industry EPDs as a category, so we have all of those uploaded. We have all the product category rules associated with all the EPDs listed, so you can start to see what those are. They set the rules for the EPDs. And then really the last thing that we're now doing is working with program operators to move from us machine reading PDFs to us actually getting digital transfers of their EPDs into the system when they create them. So this digital format for this EPD is something that we're standardizing to allow us to not have to do that from a kind of PDF reading perspective, but to have all this data just automatically populate the database when it's created by the program operator. I think the last thing is just how this actually plays into procurement. So I'm going to go down to some slides at the end here, where kind of the steps are for a project. If you go into the tool and you can't find EPDs for the products or suppliers that you're working with, ask for them. So we can only be as good as the data we have and the disclosure we have to really specify and procure low carbon options. On the Building Transparency homepage, there are downloads of request letters that we have folks using to request these EPDs of their manufacturers. And this is getting built into things like Built Green here in Washington, where it's really nice to have a standardized ask. And if a manufacturer starts to get a whole bunch of these, just like any other kind of sustainability thing we've been successful with, you need to have a demand for it. So if you don't have EPDs for what you're looking for, please ask for them. If you have EPDs, specify them. So start to use that compare materials button feature to actually create basis of design or maximum kilograms of CO2 in your spec. This is one where we've actually called out EC3 in the spec. And then make sure the request makes it into the bid documents. So on our building transparency website, we also have standard bid language of how we've seen folks start to ask for this information at time of bid, both requesting EPDs and then saying that we're going to use that information to inform assessment. And just an example of how that's worked for us on a project where we did this for concrete, we're able to give just performance requirements for concrete instead of maximums or minimums of things like cement replacement. We told the suppliers we would like EPDs. We knew we had them in our market, so we were thankfully able to get actual results back from the suppliers. We compared that against both the CLF baseline and the NRMCA regional industry average to show the reduction of each supplier. And in this case, because they knew they were competing on costs and emissions, the low bidder was the lowest emitter. So we got the reduction savings at no added cost to the project. And then what you're able to do in EC3 again is go back and select those EPDs and track those savings. So that's really, I think, the most important thing for me to drive home is that this is only as good as the data we have. We need to ask for the data. We need to build it into our procurement and specification project language, and then we need to actually show the reductions are realized. Because that's really at the end of the day what the owners want to be able to see. With that, I'm going to stop. I know that was quick and it's a lot of information, and I think there were a lot of questions in the chat, or maybe just a few. Oh, good. Things.
Yeah, I was posting links in the chat.
Okay, great. There's one question in there that was private to me, but are all buildings public, or do we have to get asked to get buildings shared with you? They are private until shared by the person that created them. We do have some public buildings in there as a starting point. We even have a template in here. There's a template section that we're starting to build out. We currently have a commercial building template that just kind of fills out the different categories, the materials that we would assume someone might want to be able to start with. So it just sets this up, you know, and then allows you to actually go in and fill these in and refine the searches, or just delete these things if you don't have them. From a privacy perspective, a user owns their projects until they decide to share that with somebody. And the way you share it is by going in here, and I could click in, you know, anyone's name that I know has a login. And if I find them, I can add them and give them different levels of access. If it's when it starts, this will say private. If you've shared it with someone, it'll say shared. And if you've made it public, it will say public. Any other questions on any of this?
It looks like Matt has a question. Matt, do you want to unmute yourself or give it out?
Yeah. Quick question. So we're a ready mix supplier in Texas, actually, and we, you know, get requests for EPDs, and over the years, you know, we've produced quite a few, and I'm sure right now they're sitting in PDF form on someone's desktop. If we wanted to, you know, that is information that we could contribute pretty easily. If we wanted to participate, how would we do that?
Yeah, so for you, there's really two ways. If there's, you know, over 25 EPDs, which I assume there probably would be for concrete mixes, if you have more than 25, if you just reach out to our team, so you could actually email me. What we've done for manufacturers that have a huge amount of EPDs that are PDFs is just create a box folder within our system for you just to dump them in. Mm-hmm. Do you know who your program operator is?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay, so the good thing is that there's only a handful of program operators for concrete. If it's one of the program operators we've already used, we've already created a script to machine read their format. So the process can be relatively quick for the system to actually digitize them for us. There is a EPD provider called Climate Earth that works with ASTM. And in that case, if you're using them, it's just a matter of making sure that those EPDs are current. And what happens is that every time you create an EPD through their generator, it automatically transfers into EC3 through an API. So there's a benefit to using Climate Earth and ASTM from just an automated perspective of every 24 hours we're pulling in any new EPDs that have been created by any of their clients. So I also have their contact information and pricing about that also. That's helpful.
Okay, thank you. I'll circle back, but that was a great answer. Thank you.
Great. We'd love to get more EPDs in for Texas that exist, so that's exciting. Anything else?
There's a question in the chat from Mark. Do you have a sense for what drives the availability of EPDs? Is it because of green codes, and how can we get more in Texas? And I'd second this question because I want to see more in Texas.
So there's kind of three things that are currently driving EPDs. The first thing that happened was the lead credit that just wanted people to have them, right? So I think the adoption we see now is because of people asking for EPDs just to check the box of that lead credit. What we're seeing now is when we're talking to suppliers, and it'd be interesting to get supplier perspectives on the phone, it really just is the business case to invest in the EPD process. So for concrete, the good thing right now, especially through the Climate Earth program, is that it's a pretty low cost for a high number of EPDs that are on demand for a number of years. So the business case where we're able to actually say, okay, supplier X, once you do this, your data is going to be available to everyone. You can check the box of having EPDs. You can also now be in the system where you can actually be compared and assessed. People know that you have them and can access them really quickly. From a cost perspective for concrete, it's actually not that unreasonable. It's about $12,000 for a concrete supplier to do this for a 3-year period for all mixes that they create. For other products, the cost is actually higher. So if you're thinking about a carpet manufacturer with 25 products, they have to pay for the LCA work for all the emissions factors for each one of those products and pay a pretty large amount for each of those EPDs. So you'll see some manufacturers that will just do it for their low carbon options to start. But what we're seeing now is that because they're seeing that folks want to look at carbon of all products, again, it's just the ask, how many people are asking for it. If 10 people want this one product to have an EPD, then they will tend to invest in the EPD for that product. So there is a similar trajectory as to what's happened with VOC content and toxicity disclosures, HP, all these things. That's just based on the AEC community and owners. I can't stress enough the buying power of owners that are doing projects all over the place. You know, thinking about the number of projects that the Microsofts and the Amazons are building across their commercial and data center portfolios. So as they start to build in requirements about this, I just got an email from a supplier that said they got contacted by one of the large tech companies about wanting to kind of basis of design their low carbon options. So I think as we see more of that too, it makes the business case much easier for the environmental folks within material manufacturing companies to invest in these things. The policy side is lagging, but it's starting to happen. So there's buy clean policy in California. We're working with jurisdictions of various types, ports and counties and cities, about looking at this and maybe focusing on 1 or 2 materials to start. So we're just at kind of the early stages of this, but it's moving pretty quickly, and we're getting queries from manufacturers, you know, weekly about how to start to invest and be part of the database. I can't stress enough: ask, inform your owners, get them to ask.
Well, Stacy, as a producer, just 2 sentences real quick.
Yeah.
We produce EPDs because we've been asked to produce EPDs.
Yep.
by our clients and customers.
Yep.
And that's the answer. It's 100% pull from us.
Thank you for supporting that. I appreciate that. The perspective of hearing it come out of the mouths of somebody that's on that side is really important. So.
There's another question in the chat. What's the margin of error with importing Revit files that have completed an LCA into EC3?
So it depends on the software you're using. So there's 2 ways to import Revit information. The first is just, I'm going to answer the import question, and then I can talk about the margin of error, which is actually kind of exciting. So I assume you're probably using Tally in the Revit model for your LCA.
Right, yes.
Yeah, so we've had projects, this is actually a project that in my Skanska role, a K-12 project where the architect did the Tally work and then imported into EC3. So the first thing to know is that, of course, EC3 is not right now, especially in the public realm, looking at all materials. I wonder if I have a Tally building I can actually open. That would be awesome. Let me just do this real quick. So the first thing it will do is give you a report and tell you these are the things that are unsupported. So it very quickly lets you know that it's not importing all of the things that you've put into all the things you're putting into your tally model. So it's looking at the high impact building materials first, which is really structure, envelope, and then getting into some key interiors. And it will give you that as a tally report. So if you click this tally report button once you've done the import, what it's going to tell you is exactly what I just said, which is what was successfully imported, what the tally quantity was, what the EC3 quantity is, so you can be sure that they're matching. And then when you get down farther, it's going to tell you, this might not have anything that was unsuccessful because it was aware, there we go. So things like metal panels, it's unsupported right now. So it's going to let you know what it didn't pull in. So you can make sure that you're just analyzing the things that are in the tool. What we had an architect do as part of this process was they exported. You can also export a building element report where it's going to give you. This is just the exercise that the architect went through. They exported this document, which gives you, line item, all the different entries, the quantities, and then these baseline conservative realized achievable numbers, like all the numbers from those different components I talked about. So they normalized their tally results for just the same categories. And what happened is the tally result was smack dab in the middle of the conservative and achievable. So it was coming in as the average of the range that we had shown. Which is what we want, because what we're trying to do with the range is give the high to the low. And if tally is kind of giving the average, that's how you would want that to map. So far with a few projects that we've seen do that normalization, the results have been what we would hope they would be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great.
And it'll tell you the tally import's the best import in terms of a quantity control perspective. The BIM 360 import still has some issues because we can't pull in family level information. So if you've got an envelope assembly, it's going to bring it all in one unit versus give you the breakouts like tally does of the different components of that assembly. So we're working with Autodesk on that right now.
Cool, thank you.
Any other questions?
There was a question I had about the blue squishy stuff, or like the uncertainty. Where are those numbers coming from? Is that just kind of a blanket, let's toss 25% on? Or are there any plans to kind of incorporate more of like a database to back those numbers, or where does that stand?
Yeah, so there are material category methodology reports that the CLF published as drafts at the time of the tool being released in November. And they're accessed from the CLF page. But what we did at that point was we came up with a methodology of those categories that you saw. So the supply chain specific, product, manufacturer, plant. And then at the time of release, the CLF decided to just spread the uncertainty the same across all material categories. So each one of those things, those assessment criteria, get 20% uncertainty right now. What we're doing at this very current moment, Building Transparency has just hired 2 data methodology leads, and the CLF has just hired a EC3 kind of coordinator to go back through each of those categories and refine that uncertainty to be specific to the material. Because the plant-specific data for one material category like concrete might be more or less impactful than the plant-specific data for carpet. So we're going through that exercise right now. The CLS perspective was to publish the methodology, apply it equally, see what folks thought about it if it actually did start to incentivize disclosure. And now that we have more funding and more brains, go back through that process of refining it.
Nice, thank you.
Not their particular product, but like the product scope. So the one I'm thinking about is for wall coverings, which is
Tom, are you asking a question? I think I can't tell if that's residual or not. Well, if that's about it, we can end early. But I put Stacy's email in the chat. If you have any questions or any comments or want to follow up about anything, you can email her, email me. I'll send out an email with the with the recording. We'll put it up through the CLF ATX YouTube page, which we're going to get up and running. But thanks everybody for joining. Thanks for great questions, and thank you so much, Stacy, for taking the time to show us EC3. It was a great presentation.
Of course, sorry about the technical difficulties, but again, I think the rule is that things have to go wrong when you're doing live demos and learning about software. So thanks for bearing with me.
And I can definitely speak to, because we've been a pilot sponsor of EC3, and they're working really hard they're always updating and always improving. So this tool's only getting better. So it's a good train to get on.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks everybody.
All right. Talk to you later. Thanks.
All right. Bye.
Thank you.